Welcome to Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring authentic stories of personal growth and lessons learned from people living true to themselves with creativity, passion, and purpose. For all past episodes, subscribe on iTunes or visit noscheduleman.com. And please connect, share, and contribute with a comment, rating, or review. And now, here's your host, the No Schedule Man, Kevin Bulmer.
I've been known to struggle with reality. It's not that it is any real mystery.
The question this week is, when you daydream about the things you really wish you could be doing, or what you'd just like to try, how much does potential feedback from the naysayers influence what you do, or what you choose not to do? Welcome. I'm Kevin Bulmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man, helping to create positive change by exploring and sharing authentic conversations on personal and professional growth. This week, I'm joined by Alison, a semi-retired entrepreneur who at the time of this recording is just about to release a book called Screw the Naysayers. Now, Tim has already started producing and sharing a podcast of the same name, and his primary goal? It's to empower young people to do the work they are uniquely suited to do and to live a life that aligns their work with the things they care about the most. Tim's message is pretty simple. Know the life you want and have the courage to live it. It was really interesting to talk to Tim. His journey is not dissimilar to those of several of the guests of this podcast. Kind of herky-jerky. Periods of rocketing forward at light speed and then grinding things to a halt. Deep introspection, questioning limiting beliefs, trying to figure out where some of those came from, and then doing the work to overcome it to ultimately live life on your own terms in accordance with your values, and then passing what you've learned on to others to try to help to empower those who wish to do the same to do just that. A few of the key takeaways, the things that really struck me immediately from my time with Tim include, number one, feeling singled out as a child and therefore realizing that he was oversensitive as an adult. Now, maybe this is just a real personal and almost selfish observation on my part, but I've just kind of realized this about myself. And at the time I'm speaking these words, I'm 44 years old and have always wondered a little bit why I would hesitate to maybe do things, or I was always so prone to wanting to try to keep everybody happy, not ruffle feathers, not make people mad. I never wanted to get in trouble or any of those kinds of things. And at the risk of making it about me, I was really interested when Tim talked about how he realized he was overly sensitive as an adult. I wonder if you can relate to that, whether you're like that or whether there's somebody in your life, a family member, a friend, a coworker, that it seems obvious to you that that's a situation that challenges them. Tim was able to not only recognize that, a deep level of self-awareness, in my opinion, but to actually go back and consider his experience from when he was younger and figure out where some of those ideas and beliefs were developed, where that came from. And then to have the accountability, to be honest with himself, to the point where he would realize that he was going to need to re-script some of what he believed about himself in order to take the next steps and get to new levels and try new things as an adult. So that sounds like a simple thing. He realized he was oversensitive and was able to cast his mind back and realize that he felt singled out as a child, and it might have started there. But that's further than a lot of us get. And then the next step is, what are you going to do about it to break through that fear and limiting belief so that you can challenge yourself to become and do something that you have previously not been or experienced in the days ahead of you? I think that's really heady, responsible, good stuff. And so I thought I would point it out. Number two, Tim talked about things being eerily calm. At one of the incarnations of his entrepreneurial journey, maybe to say that in a much simpler way, at the second point when he was trying to reinvent himself, and let's just say the money wasn't exactly flowing in, and from external appearances you would have every reason to be uneasy and maybe even panic, and he described that as a feeling of it being eerily calm. He was just honoring his intuition. He just knew it would be okay despite the outward appearances I knew exactly what he was talking about, and I say so in the episode, so I won't go too much further into it right here, other than to point out that feeling of eerie calm. I wonder if you can relate to that, because it certainly rang a bell with me. And number 3, Tim's recipe for happiness. Align your life around the things you care about. That sounds really simple, doesn't it? But is that what you're doing? Are you aligning your life around the things that you care about? Or do the things that you care about most get taken care of after all the things that you feel like you have to do that are your quote-unquote responsibilities? I'm just asking. And I'm also saying that I'm asking myself that question every single day in one form or another. I think you're really going to enjoy this. How the whole project of Screw the Naysayers came about. Here's the story of Tim Allison on Journeys with the No Schedule Man. Tim, I'm wondering what comes to mind when I ask you to recollect one of the first times where you remember saying to yourself, come on, Tim, we got to do what we got to do. Screw the naysayers and let's go.
That's a good question, and it's honestly not one I've been asked in a long time. I'd like to think earlier, but I think the one that pops into my mind, the first thing that comes into my mind, which is what I'll go with, is shortly after I got married. We were living in Toronto, and I had done the expected thing and gone to university, and I was working at the time. I was finishing my degree off part time, and as we got to the end of having that piece of paper in my hand, I was sitting at home watching television with my wife, who's originally from Nova Scotia, and we're watching TV, and a picture of the Atlantic Ocean came on, and the sun is glinting glistening, I should say, on the waves, and it just looks so beautiful. And I can't even tell you why, but I just sort of turned to her and I said, hey, honey, how would you like to go back to Nova Scotia? Which was kind of an insanely stupid thing to just randomly come out of my mind, I guess. But she kind of looked at me and said, well, are you serious? And I stopped for a minute and I said, well, I think I am. And so we actually made that trip. I did. I just said, screw it. And I resigned from what was then, I think they're still around, but Northern Telecom back in the day was a pretty big company. The hilarious part was that, 6 months after I left, they crashed, and, I almost certainly would have lost my job anyway. But I quit, and we moved out here, and without a clue as to how we were going to, make a living or anything. And we had $30,000 in the bank, and we, believe it or not, back in those days, we were able to get the frame of a house up on some family land and have a place to live. But, that's what comes to mind, Kev.
How long had you been at Northern Telecom at that point?
It wasn't all that long. It was only about 6 months. I'd been working as a systems analyst, computer systems analyst, for about 3 years. It was a crazy time, Kevin. Like the jobs were everywhere. Like, it was so different. And honestly, if your boss looked at you the wrong way or you got slightly annoyed, you just said, well, I'll just go find something else. And everybody was just in that mode. So I think, in fairness, it just didn't feel that big of a decision, for me, because I just naturally assumed that, if things didn't work out, that I had never been turned down on a job interview in my entire life. I was, 23, 24 years old. It's certainly different.
Well, you say wasn't maybe necessarily that much of a big deal. However, other people would say that moving in whatever fashion is one of the most stressful experiences that we'll go through, and you just volunteered yourself into the mouth of that beast without a plan to follow up. So I think that qualifies. What was it that was really going on inside you, do you think, now, through the benefit of hindsight, that moved you to act in that manner?
Yeah, I think it was the thing that I recall so much about the days when I first got down here was just the nearest town in still is today is Yarmouth, and it was about a 35-40 minute drive, in those days. And I'd remember be driving along, Kevin, and I would look out and I'd see all the trees. There'd be just nothing but trees, and I would literally be saying to myself, man, I can't believe I actually did this. And I think that feeling I had inside, which just literally would give me spine, I would tingle. And I think it really went back to the fact that I didn't have a lot of great memories in Toronto. I mean, I had a lot of health issues growing up as a kid. My parents had just gone, after 30 years, went through a very nasty divorce that I got, dragged into when I didn't want to be and everything. So I think there was an element of, escape to it. But I think the other thing is that here I was like sitting in this cubicle, and something was just telling me, that it just wasn't, I was passing time. And I was like 23 or 24 years old. And I'm thinking, well, it kind of sucks to think that, this is what I'm going to do for the next 40 years, that I'm going to go get a nice paycheck, but I'm going to sit there and I'm going to stare at, these cubicle sides and occasionally talk to people on the phone. So, I suspect that's what's going on. It just seemed like such a flippant moment, but you're right. I mean, we had bought a house when we first got married, and we had done some renovations. We sold that. That's where the $30,000 came from. And we literally didn't move much stuff, down here. And then I just took a leap of faith, ended up taking a job as a life insurance agent, which I was appallingly bad at. But it was one of these ones that where you could actually get, a check for 3 or 4 months while you were, training. So I just took it.
I want to go back for a moment. I find that more often than not, and maybe this will be the time that I'm wrong, but more often than not, when people mention something out loud, there's usually a reason why. And although it was in passing, you mentioned really quickly both having some challenges with your health as you were a kid and kind of being dragged into an unpleasant divorce that your parents went through. What about those things have you found that you've had to kind of process your way through as your journey has gone on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the health, the health issues. I mean, the challenge, the foundation of the challenges that I had as a kid is that my bones break very easily. So I literally, Kevin, by the time I was 15 years old, I've never really said this in any kind of big public forum, but by the time I was 15 years old, I had broken either one of my limbs, so one of my legs or one of my arms, at least 15 times. And that's a hard thing when you're really, really passionate about sports. I mean, I was crazy about sports. I played hockey, until it got to the point where my weight was such that if I fell the wrong way on the ice, I broke a leg. I played football until, it moved from flag football to the point where, you were going to get hit. And I got hit a few times. Baseball, same thing, until I actually broke a leg playing baseball. So what happened there, man, is that for the first, 15 or 18 years of my life, I came to understand that there were just certain things in life that I really, really wanted to do, but I couldn't do. Just because I had the passion for it, I just physically, couldn't do it. But looking back now, 40, 50 years later, whatever it is, that I think has been the source of my greatest success, in life, because what it did is because I was forced to deal with, people telling me I can't do some of these physical things. I think at a pretty early age decided that just because somebody tells me I can't do something, unless there's real physical pain associated with it, I'm just not going to listen to them. And I really think it does account for the fact that I didn't, leave Toronto once, but twice, because I did come back when it didn't work out that first time. But I mean, and it's why even right now at age 60, when I went around telling people that I was starting a new business and that I was going to learn to be a podcaster, much like you, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the looks don't bother me. So the health thing there definitely provided me with a foundation. Where that health thing was a struggle is because I felt singled out as a child. So in business in the early years, especially when I became my own boss, I found myself oversensitive. Like if people criticized me, I mean, I would take it the wrong way. I had difficulty, learning from challenging situations and, and the like, until I had to realize that, that wasn't helpful. The divorce side of things, I mean, what you're trying to process there is that, I think there was this underlying fear for a lot of years that how am I going to avoid that outcome? I mean, I didn't want to have that outcome. And 30 years to be married to somebody and then have it completely disintegrate into yelling, screaming, just really a hostile house environment. There's no doubt that challenged me for a long time. And, I'm just really blessed that the woman that I met and married and it's been going on, I guess 39 years this year, has just exemplified a value system that's more aligned with, with my own. And so it's, but yeah, those things do. Anytime people say that when those things are going on in your teen years that they don't, or childhood years that they don't affect you, they're either haven't taken the time to really, self-inspect, or they're not being truthful.
It's an interesting balance I'm perceiving here. One that is the heart of an entrepreneur, for better or for worse. There's just this natural curiosity to always kind of have a challenge to try to sort through. And on the other side, with what you just described about observing what your parents went through and then you went through as a result of that, and the thinking and the feelings that you carried forward, wanting to have more of a long-term, steadier commitment so do you see what I'm getting at, Tim? There's sort of an interesting, almost a paradoxical element of let's keep this steady and strong. I mean, it'll grow and morph as it will on its own, but this thing's going to stay solid. But in the meantime, I've got this spirit of curiosity that just wants to go out there and chase after everything that interests me, which is going to be a lot of things.
Yeah. I never really looked at it that way, Kevin. I mean, certainly the spirit of going out and trying things. I think I think the greater effect it had on me was to make me value family and time with family earlier on than some people do. I mean, I know we've talked before, and in my late 20s, I was back in Toronto and I had landed, because things hadn't worked out down here. We'd started a family and I just wasn't making enough money to pay the bills. And I landed at one of the top paying sales jobs in the country. I'm making all this money. I walked away from that one after 5 years when, really that time the entire world, was much more concerned about my sanity. I think the reason I was able to do that is because I'd seen what happened to my parents' relationship when they just stopped prioritizing it. And here I was, great. So what good is $150,000 a year and two lovely kids, the millionaire's family, eh? If, when you get up in the morning to go to work, your kids are still in bed. When you get home from work in the evening, your kids are already in bed. When you're living out of a suitcase 8-10 days a week. I mean, I think that's where it had the greater impact on me, rather than this desire for some reason I've been willing to accept uncertain futures for most of my life. It's just sort of there. I can't really account for because I understand what you're saying. It kind of doesn't make sense now, but there's such a difference between business and family. And if my family's threatened, I'm going to be ferocious in my defense. And again, I think that's why I ended up quitting, because I couldn't put it into words at the time, but my family was threatened. I can see it now. I mean, I wouldn't even have told you all this stuff about not seeing my kids or anything. I just knew I was miserable. Looking back, it's obvious to me what the problem was. My family was threatened. My relationship with my family was threatened, and that inside was the fear of that was greater than the fear of any uncertainty that was associated with walking away from a high-paying job and trying once again to go back to Nova Scotia and see if I couldn't make it work a second time around.
So what's that process like? The second time around, you've got more experience, but you've also got the weight and the emotional baggage of the first time around, which led you back to where you were originally in Toronto. Tell me what that was like. Yeah,
it was. There's so many different ways of describing it. The first 6 months were, a huge challenge for me, because I couldn't process really what I'd done, and I still had, I guess to a large degree, because I had failed once before. There was a part of me was a big part of me that was convinced that I had just traded any chance at a really good paying, successful career for lifestyle and family. That I was going to somehow eke out an existence down here. And that was, that was more important to me than money. But for 6 months in a row, Kevin, I pretty much got up in the morning and I dragged on a pair of jeans and an old, plaid jacket and rubber boots. And I just walked out my back door, and I had this little trail goes back. We got 20 acres of land out here, and I'm looking out my window at it right now as we speak. But I'd walk down these trails, and I had a couple of trees that I was fond of, and I'd climb a tree, and I would sit down, and I'd sit there for hours, just staring at the, at the nature that was around me, and I'd find myself, my thoughts kept drifting back to what I had left behind in Toronto. And I know now that what I was doing is I was grieving the loss of a job that was killing me. Like, I was really grieving it because I really felt that there was no hope, that there were a lot of things that I couldn't handle, and I knew I needed to escape from it. But, I enjoyed making money. I enjoyed being challenged in my work and all that kind of stuff. But then I can't really tell you why. Maybe it was the change of seasons. Things really come alive at this part of Nova Scotia in the fall when the lobster fishery opens and everybody just is full of energy and smiles. And I just sort of, kicked it in gear and went out and started talking to people. And, it didn't take me all that long until we were at least paying the bills. And it was somewhere in the first, it probably took me 3 or 4 years. Then I finally realized, hey, I had bought into a lie. I bought into the concept that just because I was living here, that I couldn't really have a really successful and well paid career, and things just kind of went from there. But I would not want to say it was easy, but I was eerily calm. I wish I could tell you why, but I remember coming home from I'd been out fishing. I had this little rubber dinghy that I used to just, blow up things, one of these inner tube things. I used to climb in that thing and float out on a lake and go bass fishing, just, lying on my back and just throw it on the side of the lake there. And I remember coming back and walking in the house, and, our bank statement was on the dining room table, and my wife's standing there sort of looking at me. She didn't say a word, but I didn't even want to peek in the envelope because I pretty much knew, but we had about $700 left in the bank. And that was not going to be enough for the food and the mortgage payment, next month. And I went back outside. I went back to that lake for a little while, just trying to figure out what I was going to do. But I came back in the house, and a fax arrived with our first contract. And the next day I got another one. I got $75,000 worth of business in a day, in 24 hours. And we kind of never looked back. But yeah, it's different. This is why why I kind of believe that we put way too much emphasis on backup plans. I think if something's important enough to you, that you just got to go do it. I'm not telling people to be reckless or whatever, but if it's important to you and you really want it and you're prepared to keep working at it, then if we start out with that big backup plan, where we say, if this doesn't work out, I can always go back to Toronto, or, I didn't have a job waiting for me back in Toronto. And if I did, I don't know. I might have given in when that bank statement arrived. I can't tell you.
Another thing that I think is interesting that I'm processing while I'm listening to you share all of this, Tim, is wanting to make that move back out east, again, in large part because you felt like you were really losing your connection to your family. Yeah. And one of the things that will definitely put a strain on any partnership is financial strain and the stress that comes with that and uncertainty. And you only just briefly touched on, with your wife looking at the financial statement and whatnot, but at least in that short term, how tricky was that to navigate between the two of you?
It actually, Debbie might say something different. For me, it didn't seem like it. She's a very special. I suppose a lot of folks would say this about their spouse, but she's just a very special person, Kevin. I think she just knew that, that I really needed to do this. In truth, she wasn't even that thrilled about coming back the second time. I'd already dragged her out there once, and she was living in Toronto, and she did not have a driver's license. We had 2 young kids. The youngest one was less than a year old, but we were for those that know Toronto, we were near Bayview Village, Bayview and Shepherd, and so she could just walk her kids, to the mall. If it's too hot in the summertime to get an ice cream or entertain, she could get on a bus to go around and do things. There was a little park literally on the other side of the fence in our backyard. But once I, she knew that it was really in me and that I wanted to do it, she just never really had said a word. And look, over the years, you run a business I've been self-employed there, for the last 30 years or so, and 32, I guess. I promise you that in those years, there were years when things were just, going great. And there were times when our backs were against the wall. And, for some reason, Debbie's, whether it's faith in me or just the calmness that she seems to, you can't get this woman mad, and it's quite a contrast for someone that's sort of a type A personality like me.
I want to come back to this, thread here in just a moment, but first I just find myself curious to ask your thoughts on what's more challenging, if one of them either is. Throttling up to go from an East Coast lifestyle to the humdrum of Toronto, or going from the pace of Toronto and maybe throttling back a little bit to settle into the East Coast lifestyle?
I think it's harder to throttle up. I think when you get to Toronto, having been down here for any period of time, that there's just the ability to sort of look around and observe some of the insanity that's moving around around you, and the pace. And when I came back here and started the business up, the biggest thing that I had to change when I was going in to talk to potential customers, and in those days I was still selling to larger corporations and governments and stuff like that, and was that I had to learn that, like in Toronto or Calgary or Ottawa, Montreal, those were all places I was in a lot. If I had an appointment with a senior decision maker in an organization, they were looking at their watch almost before you walked in the office, and they really wanted you to get right to the point. It didn't take me long to realize out here that if I didn't sit down and look around and see if there was a picture of a kid, maybe, a kid at a hockey rink or something like that, something to sort of spark some sort of personal, connection, that you almost offended people. So I had to learn that. But then after you did that, I think you really start to embrace it. And as business has changed over the years, the ability to form those relationships is the reason why people buy. They buy a product or a service, yes, to fulfill a need, but mostly they buy from people that they like and respect. And so it definitely, that part was a little easier.
Let's go back to where you were a few moments ago when you were talking about the occasion when you had $700 in the bank and you didn't know where the next thing was coming from. But you described a sense of being eerily calm. Yeah. And I find that to be a really interesting thing as well, because I feel like maybe in my own way and in a much smaller scale, I've experienced a little bit about what you're referring to. But I'm wondering if I can ask you to go into that a little bit more, because I take that, Tim, as to mean it's almost like a... Tell me if we're on the same page here, if you'll indulge me for a second. Almost like a kind of an out-of-body experience where you can see this chaos that you may have previously bought into and can identify a lot of reasons why there maybe should be or had been in the past more worry points or anxiety attached to certain potential outcomes. Yet in this time around, you're still aware of them. You see that they're still out there. You can perceive that noise. But it's almost like you're in this sort of spiritual or emotional bubble where you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, not to get too hyperbolic about it, but you just, I feel almost like it's a bit of an out-of-body experience where you just feel driven forward because, again, to borrow a phrase that you used a moment ago, you just know. How close is that to what you were experiencing?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you nailed it right on the head. It really, that's a perfect way of saying it. It is just like an out-of-body experience. Your mind is rationally telling you that, this is a serious situation. You should be scared. But you're not. And I think if I had to, deconstruct it, I think at the core of it, I wouldn't have said it at that time, but I think at the core of it was just this fundamental belief that the ground my feet were standing on was just where I needed to be. Yeah. And that it was the place that, we needed to raise our family and where I was going to find a way to be the present, parent that I really wanted to be. And because it's the core. And I think it's what happens, Kevin. It's part of what I really, in the book that I've got coming out or be out now, I guess, the core of it, really has to come back to understanding that to be happy, the secret is to make sure that you align your life around the things that you really care about. And if you do that, the other shit doesn't matter. Like, you're just going to find a way to work through it. And, but it's almost like, and you've gone through something like that. It's almost impossible to explain to somebody who hasn't, because they just feel you should be absolutely, running for the nearest bridge or something.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to the way you answered my question about your wife and your relationship together. I think that when there is fear, general anxiety and unease or dis-ease and a self-doubt, I think that most people, and especially those that are closest to us, can sense it. Mm-hmm. And yet, I think the reverse is also true. Wouldn't you say, Tim, is that when there is that eerie calm of this, I know this looks... but it's not my first rodeo, and I really believe we're in the right spot. I think that energy comes across, too. Yeah,
it does. It's exactly what we're, in complete transparent honesty, it's my wife and I are in exactly the same position right now, Kevin. I was ready to retire. We bought the camping trailer. We're still going to do a bunch of camping this summer, but, and she stopped working. So we were all set. And then I started talking to her. Well, I got this book coming out and I think I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to spend some money on, doing this she still does give me the looks, but I just have the same calmness about me. And I just say, well, you just got to trust me that I'm not just wasting away, I should say, our retirement funds and it'll go someplace good. And, and it's, the thing is that like, I consider myself to be a very ordinary person. Like, I always, I look at the amount of attention I've gotten over the years and I got a lot of media attention like 4 or 5 years after I got down here because the business did explode. And it was such a unique story back in those days, like, people leaving the rat race and all that kind of stuff, which is much more commonplace today. Wasn't going on so much. And, so there I was on the front page of the entrepreneurs section. It was in the Globe and Mail, a section in the Globe and Mail National Edition, how to get a life with an ocean view, and a picture of me on a cliff, with sitting on the edge of a cliff with a laptop on my legs. And I kept saying to myself, well, if people want to come down to my community, I can take you and introduce you to 25 business people that are more financially successful than I am. How come they're not in the paper?
What were you doing at that time, Tim?
We were an educational software company, and so we started out in the early days mostly as just a distributor. I just went around and rounded up product that was teaching, largely computer skills and things like that, and I was helping large corporations in Atlantic Canada and government organizations set up internal learning centers, is what they were calling them there. But by the time it exploded, what had happened is I had developed a partnership with a very large, U.S. multinational, not around anymore, like a lot of them, but it was called Jostens Learning. It was an arm of the yearbook company. And they had an adult literacy program, taught reading and math and writing and employability skills type of things to adults that had kind of slipped through the cracks. And so I had found these guys, and I knew a lot about the technology. I knew nothing about education. I knew a lot about technology, and I was really impressed with the learning platform. And So I pitched them. I mean, I don't know where I found the nerve, but I pitched them on me coming up with some dollars and finding some Canadian, teachers and writing some curriculum, because you can't use a product to teach math, that doesn't teach metric, for example, or the reading comprehension lessons that were had a secret agenda, which was to teach people to be good U.S. citizens by teaching them about the U.S. Constitution and stuff like that. I couldn't have used in Canada, so. And I talked them into doing that. So I basically ended up from this little fishing village, partnering with Jostens, became the national distributor for that jointly developed product. And we had a very wonderful 8-10 year run. I sold coast to coast. The sales were to community colleges or First Nations or nonprofit organizations, and they would put in learning labs with 10 or 15 or sometimes even 20 workstations and install this software on it. So I had about 115, my customers, there were 115 of those labs across Canada teaching adults and at-risk youth. And my best guess is, I'll never know the real number, but my best guess is about 250,000 Canadians touched that software. And so that, it felt really good, and we made a good living. Did I get rich? No, but I mean, I had a well above average income for this part of the country. And, as you might imagine, the cost of living out here is just not quite what it was in Toronto.
Yeah, save me a spot, Tim. All the Toronto people are coming here to London now. Anyway, that's another.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it would have been good for me to have invested in some property a little while back. But in any case, I digress. To get back on track, I'm going to skip over a pretty good chunk of it, only because I really want to make sure that we have an opportunity to take some time to flush out what you're doing now as best we can. But I feel like you've given some pretty good context. You had some ups, you had some downs. You ultimately ended up being pretty successful in the way that you described it in terms of your business endeavors. Had your priorities straight in terms of knowing what mattered most to you with your family and where you wanted to be. And by all measures, it sounds like you were pretty satisfied with the life that you had lived and worked up to that point. And as you've described, got to your retirement.
Yeah.
But what was it that, or is it, or both, that has stirred you up off the sidelines and back into a game once again?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah, because I am stirred up. I mean, what's really got me cranked up here, Kevin, is, and, I'm a parent of 2 millennials, both who have, landed and are doing well. One went the path of, he works for the Canadian Coast Guard and in the technology side of things on shore and doing very well. And my daughter has followed in my footsteps, a totally different business, but she runs her own business right from this little community that I live in. But what's really stirred me up here is that I'm observing a world where there's so much change going on in terms of the employment opportunities that are out there for people that are in their 20s and even into their 30s. I'm seeing an education system that is still preparing our kids, largely the same way they were prepared 300 years ago at the start of the Industrial Revolution. It's a compliance-based education system that tells our kids to go to school, sit down, behave, and wait for instructions. And what's going on out there is that they're buying into the myth here that if they do that and then they go to university and they incur all this debt and they get their degree, that there's going to be this fabulous job waiting for them. The reality is that, I don't know whether that was ever true, but it's certainly not true today. The research is definitely telling us that at least in North America, 50% of people under the age of 30 are either unemployed or underemployed, and most of them are underemployed. That's why all these stats today about, our unemployment rates are at an all-time low. Yeah, well, you know what? Youth unemployment is not. It's like 15%. But 50% of youth, if you consider 30 and under to be in that category, they're working in jobs that are well below what their qualifications are. A lot of them have university degrees, and they're working in jobs that don't even require those degrees. And they're amazingly talented people. And I'm sick and tired of reading all this crap about millennials being entitled and they just want the world handed to them. Look, we told them to go to school, do as they were told, learn all this stuff, learn how to memorize all this information and spit it back, and then to wait for the job. It takes a lot of nerve on our part to criticize them for waiting for the job when it's not there. And so, I've made it a mission, a big part of my mission to try and create a movement here where we can teach anybody, but in particularly help, the younger, generation figure out how to create their own opportunities and to not buy into all the negativity out there that says, well, that's just the way life is. You just got to start at the bottom and, work your way up. You have to be patient, take your time. Well, I have so much time for Gary Vaynerchuk, but he's an amazing guy. But he's running around the world telling everybody to don't worry about it. Wait till you're 30. I'm telling you, personally, I think that's bad advice. I think that if you haven't figured out what you want to do and you want to gather experiences, that's great. But the reality is if you don't start to figure this stuff out till 30, there's going to be a big economic and social cost for you. Try and establish a relationship. Try and think about getting married and having kids. If you haven't even got yourself sorted out from a career standpoint, like, what you're going to be doing to make a living and all those kind of things. And we've taught our kids that, to be successful, they have to follow the rules. They need to be told that to be successful, you've got to be willing to challenge conventional wisdom. We tell them that, that they need to fear failure. That failure is a really bad thing. Think of the way we go through school. Every time we fail at something, there are negative consequences. Nobody likes to, has too many good memories of bringing home report cards and things like that to parents that weren't good. So don't try a subject that you find really challenging, but is interesting to you, because it might pull down your GPA or whatever the heck averages and stuff like that. And, we need to, get people understanding that whether failure is the right word or not, we could get into a long debate on that, but that it's perfectly okay to try things to see if you like them or to try things to see if they can be done. And if you can't, then, learn from it and, get on to the next thing. So, it is all about that. And I found myself over the last 5 or 6 years, just engaging with young people, perhaps running into them. I'm talking way too much here, Kevin, but the one story that comes to mind is I about a year ago, I was at a little local cafe here, and my wife and I go most mornings for a cup of coffee there, and it's a small community, so you pretty much know everybody. And there was this young woman in there, 5 or 6 days in a row, really professionally dressed, and I'm thinking, how come I don't know you? I should know you. You're kind of in that age bracket where I should know who you are. So I finally, on about the 5th day, went up and I introduced myself and asked if I could sit down and chat. And turns out this young lady was originally from our community. She was an amazing dancer, but an interpretive dancer. Like, she is very much into the physicality of dance. And she had done what she thought was the right thing to do. She'd gone to Toronto to pursue a career in dance, which meant she was teaching little children how to, tap dance and stuff like that. She had come back home having realized that wasn't what she ever aspired to do in life, that had made her unhappy. And she was like 27 years old. And I'm thinking, well, good for you. You figured that out early. I said, now what are you doing now? Oh, she says, I'm a social media consultant. And I sort of look at her and I say, well, why are you doing that? Well, I have to make my money somehow, and I can take pictures of things, and and so I just kind of looked at her, and she was asking for some introductions to some people. And I said, I'll do that for you, but are you really sure you want to do this? And so then we just had a little more conversation about her passion for dance. And, don't you know, about 2 months later, I'm in the local town, in Yarmouth there, and I see a post from her that she has rented space above one of the old, you got to picture Main Street, old town, little village, and you got the old buildings with the storefronts are on the ground floor, and you got all the, the empty space upstairs that nobody wants to use. So she rents one of those spaces. She cleans it up. She puts in a business. I'll give a shout out to her. It's called Waves of Confetti. She puts a dance floor in it. She's doing lessons there. She's doing yoga lessons. She's holding community events. She just had started privately an artist in residence situation where she invited artists of any kind from around the world to come and stay at her house for 3 weeks and collaborate with anybody they want in the community and put a show on. And so somebody that she was living in Germany that she knew came over, and we just all had a chance to go see it. And I went up to her and I said, do you remember when we were talking a year ago when you were talking about social media? And she just smiles, more or less a gentle punch in the shoulder. Like that's empowering. And we've got to find a way to bring that out of people, because if they don't, they're not only are they getting screwed by not making very much money, they're going to live a very dissatisfied life. Sorry for the long answer, but when you ask a question that I'm passionate about, you tend to get that from me.
Yeah, I wish I could get you going here, Tim. You got to give me something. Work with me here, man. Come on. It's really great when you can sense, even just coming through the internet lines like this. I'm amazed at how you can feel other people's energy even when you're not with them, and your passion is clear. So that makes me even more curious about, as you recognize this fire starting to build in your spirit, where did you start to attack it? Because now we're talking about a podcast, a book, and whatever else that you've got associated. But where did you start with this?
The book. I had actually written a book which had almost no distribution, about kind of parts of my life story. 17, 18 years ago. And when I went and looked at it, I realized that it was certainly my truth at the time, Kevin, but the challenge was that it wasn't real. It was like a hero's journey. It was all about, well, look at how great and successful this guy is. And I thought, there's no lessons in there. The lessons come from, for example, how hard it was for me to extricate myself from that job. And, the nights of having imaginary battles between, different voices in my head to the point where, you think you're losing it. One hand saying you got to go to Nova Scotia, the other hand saying that you'd be an absolute idiot to do it, and all those kind of things. So I tried to sit down and write about the most challenging parts of that journey, to see about using that as a learning experience. And then, in order to give it relevancy for today, I also tried to sort of look at what it's like growing up today, and the way our society is molding people. Really, this whole damn system is setting them up to settle and to not, to expect less from life and everything. And it started with the writing. And then I started sharing it, and I started sharing it with younger people in their 20s and some a little older, but people that I had not known before, just people I sort of got to meet in the community. And then I went to, of all places, at Waves of Confetti, she had a poetry slam where people just come and read, poems and stuff like that. I took some of the verse from my novel. I've never done a public reading like this in my life, Kevin. I took it and I went there and I read a few of the. And, they don't clap at those things. They snap their fingers, but I got a lot of snaps, and I was looking at these young kids and I'm thinking they're understanding what I'm saying. And, so, I really, I got going on the book, and then in the process, I just started to, I can't really define the exact moment where I said I have to do a podcast, but I started to look around. I started to, I'm learning there are lots of kindred spirits out there with messages. The world is so big, and there's so many people that are screwed up that no matter how many of us we get out there, we have a massive, almost impossible challenge. But I started to realize that it was possible to sit here and be looking out at the trees and to be talking to people around the world. And, the podcast, that I've got going, I mean, my first 10 guests, I've that they're not all published just yet, Kevin. But I mean, I spoke to people in 6 different countries and in 4 different continents around these issues, and only one of those individuals is somebody that I actually knew before this whole thing started. And so the whole damn thing just snowballed, and it went from, I'll write a book, I might, I'll do some public readings, maybe do a little public speaking or whatever, to, well, this world of podcasting, gets you in front of a lot of people. And then I started to, realize that, I'm going further with it. I've hired a totally amazing, a big shout out to Samat Suri, or Sammy as I call her, because I've got one of the sharpest university students in Atlantic Canada, maybe in the country, working for me this summer. And we're talking to her peers, her peer group, and we're saying, well, how could we best help you? what do you really need, in order to sort of break free from a system that's screwing you. And I have no idea where all that's going. I'm just sort of sucking in all the information and continuing to talk to people. But I will say that it got to the point where I was spending enough money that it was no longer a hobby. And so then I had to have the honest conversation with myself, and that was, and then with my wife. That one was a little more challenging, because then I had to decide, do I have the energy? Do I have the fire at 60? But I'm hoping from the inflection of my voice, you'll agree that the decision that I made is that I think the fire is still there. I can't do it like I used to. I can't live out of an airplane. But I can do it. I can do it over the internet, and I can do it with podcasts, and so we're just pedal to the metal, and good gosh, we'll touch base. I know we're going to become friends and stay in touch, and who knows where either one of us are going to be in 6 months. And that's why I really relate to sort of the theme of your world, the No Schedule Man, because I don't have a clue. I really don't. I just know that the direction feels right, and it's fun and it's energizing.
There's No Schedule Man actually started as a song. You probably knew that. I can't remember if we've discussed that or not. There's a song that I use of my own that ends this podcast, which is called Deja Vu. I'll spare you the story of it, but the lyrics say, oh gosh, isn't this funny? You can sing it, but then when you're thinking about it, because you mentioned part of it, but it basically says, here I am again, and here we're going to go. I wish that I knew where, but I don't have a clue. That's what you said. I don't have a clue. Just a little deja vu. It's like, it keeps coming back around, and when you feel driven, sort of like, okay, I've been here before, and I have some of the bones of this plan, but in terms of where we're going to go, I can't articulate that for you. I just know we need to go there. That sounds like kind of where you are now.
That's exactly it. And it does make it hard, because, people are, it's almost like when I first started my first, real business down here, the software company. I mean, look, nobody around here had a clue what an educational software company was. I mean, they're bright, intelligent people. They can make homes and build things and all this kind of stuff. My best friend was and still is a carpenter, home builder. But if I tried to tell them what my company was doing, they didn't have a clue. And unfortunately, I'm right back in that same spot. I'm at social gatherings, and somebody says, well, what are you doing? You relax, you're retired. No, I'm working hard. I work every day. I'm working 6 days a week. What are you doing? And then you start trying to explain it to them, and you just can't put into words. But it's, I guess this is just, it's the feeling. It's back to the word you used. It is the feeling. And like, I think when you get as much gray hair as I have, I've only had this kind of feeling maybe 3 or 4 times, in my life, where it just felt that solid inside. And I've just, learned to trust that, when there are no uncertainties, it just feels right. To just apply your skills, learn. I am learning. I'm telling you what, it's much respect for, I think you said this was number 79 or 80 or something like that for you, Kevin, of a podcast. I mean, people think it's just a snap and a breeze, but certainly for somebody my age, getting all this set up I wouldn't describe it that way, it's but it's challenging, and and it feels right.
What's the alternative? Or to put it another way, entering into retirement and choosing to follow this inclination, as opposed to what? What would you be doing otherwise?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. I mean, certainly, and we're going to do it. We've booked 30 nights of camping over the next 4 months, and I'm going to work that into the schedule and all that kind of stuff. But, and certainly some travel, but I think honestly that, that's part of it. I mean, I have on and off, I sold off the IP in my software company back in 2006. So I've worked as a business coach at times very intensely, but there have been periods of time in there too when I sort of eased off and recharged the battery and stuff. But I think I inevitably realized that, and it almost loops back to the health stuff, Kevin. I cannot do a lot of the things that I used to do out in the woods and stuff like that. I can't climb trees anymore. I really can't venture that far into the woods anymore. It's not all that, safe for me. So what am I going to, I say to myself, what am I going to do? I mean, I love to read, but I mean, am I going to sit in the house and read every day? I mean, I think a good part of what was going on here is that I needed to get, some purpose in life, that would keep the mind, working and challenged. And, I guess it's just, it's hard for me to say this, but I mean, once again, I was sitting there not believing that, saying to myself, well, that window is past. I'm probably not going to find that next opportunity, only to then when I put my mind to it, realize that it was probably sitting there all along. So
let's dive in a little bit more into the book. What came this sounds like a chicken or the egg question. I never liked those. I don't like either ors, but I've already started into it, so I'll finish it. Did the title come first, or the sort of the contents and the body?
Yeah,
of it?
no, the content. I messed around a lot with with trying to to frame it. I knew it was always about, because, boy, I tell you, Kevin, when I came back the second time, the first time we moved to Nova Scotia, I was young. I had not really achieved all that much. I'm sure people thought I was a little screwy, but I mean, I just didn't give a crap. I just went the second time around. I'd agonized, over the decision. And I did not find anybody that was, making me feel that I'd made a rational decision, including people that I met when I got out, here to Nova Scotia. I remember, I think I tell the story in the book. Yeah, I do. I remember going to see somebody who worked for the Nova Scotia Department of Economic Development, it was called in those days, and describing the business I was going to start. And the guy leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and shook his head and said, well, that'll never succeed. I just ran into so many people that said that, naysayers. And I see the negativity, and I see them, these are the people that are shaking their heads and saying, whenever somebody's struggling a bit and it's, they'll say something like, oh man, that's really too bad, but I told you so. We got them, and we got these others that just seem to get their rocks off on watching people, struggle and everything. And I'm just, it just started to come out, and what I wanted people to understand is the systems that, and this is a part of the message that's really difficult. Your parents hopefully love you deeply, and so they're giving you in almost all cases the best possible advice. Unfortunately, if you're 20 or 18 or 16 or 24 and life isn't exactly turning out the way you wanted it to, and you're not sure kind of what to do next, there's a huge probability that whatever advice they're giving you is bad advice. They just aren't. Anybody that's 45 and up just doesn't get that the approaches we used to use in the past don't work anymore. They don't understand that just printing off another stack of resumes and taking it off and out and dropping it off. And of course, the modern day equivalent of that is just to sit in front of your computer and do online applications all day, that it will get you nowhere, that almost nobody gets, real work that way. So, there was such a need, and it just kept bubbling up. Like, well, let's talk about those systems, but let's make it funny. I mean, I definitely tried to make it, one of the first book reviews that came in described it as, I think she said, if you like someone who's forthright and articulate, hilarious and a wee bit sarcastic, you're going to like this book. There's a fair bit of sarcasm in here. I'm trying to make fun at a society that's just not getting the messaging right. And so it's sort of, I just remember then some nights sitting there messing around, and eventually Screw the Naysayers came to me. I went and looked. There is a song out there by that name that was written some time ago, but there's really not a whole lot, out there around it. And I thought that just sort of sums up what I want to say to the world. So,
From here, what's the best way that people can get on board with you, follow you, read the book, add to your message, help spread it? What would you recommend?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, absolutely the first thing I'd suggest is just head over to screwthenaysayers.com.
Can I stop you for a second?
Sure.
How much fun is it for you to say that? Visit me at screwthenaysayers.com.
I was, this is a true story. Very first day that Sammy, the university students working for me, I'm trying to get some stuff straightened out with Google on one of our Google accounts or something like that. And I've got this guy on speakerphone because I don't understand a word he's saying. And Sammy's there with me, and he says, okay, now what's the domain? And I say, screwthenaysayers.com. And there's this spontaneous laughter, in the background. Yeah, it feels fabulous. I mean, so yeah, screwthenaysayers.com. You can, from over there, actually, it's still now for a little bit, you can actually score the book for free over there it's not going to last, but I'm just really trying to get it out there to start to build some momentum towards a bestseller campaign. You can also, of course, get it on Amazon, but at the webpage. And then what you can do is just accept, or make a request to join our private Facebook group. It's free. We're doing it by invitation only for one simple reason. I just not letting any naysayers in there to, mess it up. But everybody's welcome. And we're just trying to create, a community of people that just want to help others. So a safe place to share ideas, to give advice or whatever. And of course, the podcast, which is also, it's called the Screw the Naysayers podcast. I've just stayed real consistent. And it's, you could sign up for that on our website, or, it's in all the normal places, iTunes, Stitcher, and the like. But the most important thing, and I'm sure it's the same thing with you, it's just to interact with us. Like if we can hear back what we're doing, when our messages are resonating, and what what other things we should be talking about, if we can get suggestions on people who have stories that we should be sharing. I think that's the stuff that we're all kind of looking for.
I'm looking at the title
Yeah.
On your webpage, not the title, the cover.
Yeah.
Are those two skydiving sheep?
Yeah,
Is that what they're doing? Are they just hoping that their chutes will open? Is this what I'm looking at?
That's it. And it's actually it's a clip from the cover of the book, Kevin. And the cover of the book is those two skydiving sheep. And one of them is just saying, to the other, screw the naysayers. They suck anyway. Oh. And it's, and that was, I got to give credit to, David Morato, who's a book designer, an amazing guy. And he had a good chat with me, and he went away and he came back with this idea. And I thought, and then, we had an illustrator, I want to say Scott Reed, I believe, draw that for us. But that's the concept. I mean, we even played around with the idea of having a sheep that had all of his wool, shaved off, and was wearing a sweater, to be in fashion for the season. I mean, the whole idea is, who cares what other people think? If they think you're loony, it doesn't. In fact, if some of the people in your life don't think you're a little bit crazy, then I can almost promise you that you're not pushing the envelope enough here.
Well, Tim, I wish you all the best with it. I'm here however I can help and whenever I can, and I hope I can be supportive, or at least a good sounding board, an ear, a good friend along the way. And I really admire what you're doing. I admire and respect your spirit and everything that you've put into the game so far. I wish you all the best of success with it, and keep us up to date.
Yeah, I will, Kevin. Thanks very much for this opportunity.
To connect with Tim and learn more about Screw the Naysayers, the best place to do that is at screwthenaysayers.com. Screw the Naysayers, all one word, .com. Links to the book, his podcast episodes, a little bit of his biography and the project in general is all available at that webpage. And, of course, I'll have that up on the show notes. Blog post for this is episode 78 at noschedulemanpodcast.com. If you liked this episode with Tim, I'm pretty sure you're going to like episode 75 with Beth Allen. It's called Flush the Fear. Beth has a really terrific story of how she eventually landed into what she's doing now. It's not a linear story, as you can imagine, and bears a lot of resemblance to Tim, in that she just had to honor her intuition in terms of what mattered most to her, and then have the courage to go after that. Episode 67 with Dan Martell, who, like Tim, is from the eastern part of Canada and who is a very successful entrepreneur. It's called How Do I Create a Life I Love? And Dan, also like Tim, Works with young people in a slightly different sense, though, but I'll let Dan's story take care of that. I highly encourage you to listen to that. It's episode 67, How Do I Create a Life I Love, with Dan Martell. And talk about screwing the naysayers. How about not having any fully formed arms or limbs, being born a quadriplegic? And imagine the limiting beliefs that you might have about yourself or what you might endure from other people, well-meaning though they may be, if that was your situation. Well, that's Tracy Schmidt. Or put another way, unstoppable Tracy Schmidt. Talk about screwing the naysayers. Tracy doesn't know anything but. Episode 62 is called How to Be Unstoppable, and I encourage you to wrap your ears around that story. It's a doozy. You can find those and all past episodes of this podcast around the world on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and at NoScheduleManPodcast.com. If you'd like to connect with me, I'd love that. Just look for No Schedule Man on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter, or visit me at kevinbulmer.com. Jump on one of my email lists if you like to get periodic emails to support you on your journey of personal and professional growth. You can also be a part of my online mastermind and mentorship community. It's called the Turtle Tribe. It's ideally suited for people looking to embrace the process of personal and professional growth. That doesn't happen overnight, sorry to say. So if you're ready to be patient and take all the steps and enjoy the process, maybe the Turtle Tribe is for you. Ideally, it's people that do just that so they can do their best work, live their best life, and enjoy each step along the way. If you'd like to learn more about that and maybe start a free trial membership, just visit theturtletribe.com. Thanks so much for listening and spending this time with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope it's been helpful. If it is, please subscribe wherever you might be listening, and it would be great to have you here again for the next chapter of Journeys with the No Schedule Man.
Just a little deja vu.